begin.
Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Richard Nantel. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend this McGill School of Continuing Studies event presented by Mark Hollingworth titled Sustainability, Who Cares? We're honored to have you as our guests. We'll be pausing to take questions throughout this presentation. To submit a question, please use the GoToWebinar question box. To find the question box, look to the top right-hand corner of your screen. You'll see a column of icons. Click the red arrow icon, and that will expand the control panel. The question box is located at the bottom of that panel. It's now my pleasure to introduce our featured speaker today. Mark Hollingworth is the president of Five Eyes Strategic Affairs and is an expert in strategic leadership. He has worked as a management consultant, workshop leader and facilitator, educator and coach to the profit and not-for-profit sectors for more than 25 years. Mark is a faculty lecturer at McGill School of Continuing Studies and a program leader at the Executive Institute at the Des Hôtels Faculty of Management at McGill University. He is the author of the book, Growing People, Growing Companies, Achieving Individual and Organizational Success in the Knowledge Economy, and has also had several articles published in the Ivy Business Journal. Mark's mission is to help people, companies, and society to prepare for the future. He acts as a guide, trusted supporter, and devil's advocate to ensure that individuals and organizations make the best decisions possible and that those decisions result in concrete action and change. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Hollingworth.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the session. The next hour, we're going to be looking at a kind of very holistic 36,000 feet view of sustainability. And the title of the session was Sustainability, Who Cares? And hopefully you care because you've taken the time to take an hour of your valuable time to actually attend the seminar. But it was kind of, I came up with the idea based on the idea of that expression that who cares, that you hear a lot from younger people and sometimes from some of the older generation as well when they're talking about things that kind of they know about but they're not really too interested in. So one of the challenges we're going to be looking at over the next hour is finding out, not just answering rhetorically that question, who cares, but really looking at, there's two sides to the equation. One is a set of values around sustainability that some of us have and some of us don't. And do we care enough? Everybody will care about sustainability when there's no price to pay. And ultimately, in order to take the tough decisions around sustainability in all the different ways we're going to look at it today, somewhere, somehow, someone has to pay a price. And so that's one of the things I'd really like you to be thinking about as we go through this session is what price are you willing to pay to have a sustainable lifestyle, live in a sustainable community, to work in an organization that is truly sustainable, not just doing some green marketing activities, and obviously taking care of the environment as well. When we look at definitions of sustainability, we realize that I don't seem to have control of my keyboard at the moment. There we go, that's better. Let's consult a dictionary. And when we do so, we find that sustainability, or the verb to sustain, means to maintain or to endure in a very simple way. When we look at a more detailed definition, however, it becomes looking at a method of harvesting or using a resource so that that resource is not depleted or permanently damaged over an extended period of time. And it's that kind of depletion and permanently damaged definition that we're going to be looking at as we go through the presentation today. There's certainly some things we can look at as we talk about sustainability. When we look at the way we can pose the question, we often hear people talking about things being more sustainable or our companies increasingly implementing sustainability policies. But when we talk about is something maintainable, the answer is either yes or no. Can we endure it? It's either yes or no. They are closed questions. And particularly when we're looking at resources being depleted or are they being permanently damaged, again, it's a closed question. The answer is either yes or no. So let's put aside the idea that we're trying to move towards sustainability slowly. It really is a mindset of starting to put sustainability first and showing that we really do care about sustainability and we're willing to go along and pay the price that's required in order to become more sustainable. When we look at sustainability from the point of view of corporations, and here I've put a few facts down that, or at least my version of the facts that I look at when I look at some organization, you can look at some of the practices and you can just ask yourself, is this really sustainable? Is it sustainable to ask your employees to be on call 24/7 on their Blackberries or calling into the office or when they take vacations, etc., etc.? Is that truly sustainable? The idea of the environmental movement, and some of the indigenous groups call it, we're soiling our own beds, in that we're polluting the very environment in which we live. Is that sustainable? Is it sustainable as a corporation or in your community? Being driven just by quarterly performance, is that sustainable? There's not many organizations who are able to grow and continually, sustainably generate profits on any sort of basis. The focus on quarterly performance often leads us to cut things that may give us advantages in the future, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years out, to focus on the short-term returns, which is going to affect our share price and is going to affect our remuneration packages at the end of the year. Many of us, because of the very system of public companies on the stock market, we're very much focused on operational versus strategic planning, i.e. short-term versus long-term. And you can even ask the fundamental question of why do companies exist? If you believe that companies do exist purely to make particularly short-term money for shareholders, you will run the organization not necessarily in a sustainable manner. If you believe it's organizations, company exists to solve social needs of customers, of clients, then obviously you're going to be generating that organization in terms of revenues. You're going to be managing it in a completely different way to if you focus just on the short term. When you look at actually the performance of companies over history, it's actually quite interesting that even the management practices that I would consider not being sustainable, they've actually failed to achieve the financial objectives that companies claim to be trying to aim for. When Chris Zook and James Allen wrote Profit from the Core, they discovered that 90% of companies fail to achieve profitable growth. When you look at the Standard & Poor's index of the 90 major US companies in the 1920s, those companies stayed on that list for an average of 65 years. Today, when you look at companies on the expanded S&P 500, that tenure is only 10 years. 65 to 10 years is a huge change. Companies are not sustainable as long as they used to be. Obviously, some of those disappear as a result of mergers and acquisitions, but many of them disappear and even are acquired because they're simply not performing. So when you look at the current model of how we are managing our organizations, you can quickly conclude that in actual fact we're not managing them in a sustainable way, and we're not even generating the economic returns that we claim to be focused on. When we start looking at our communities and societies in which we live, we can also ask ourselves, are the practices we're using actually sustainable? Here in Montreal, in Quebec, there's a great discussion now about the quality of our infrastructures, whether it's water, our roads, our highways, etc. We again have a very short-term view around elections and making sure politicians get elected at the next time round. Many people are focused on disposability, the throwaway society, not in my backyard, not invented here. There's a distinct lack of support social programs for the have-nots. There's a lack of planning for workers whose jobs have been outsourced to low-cost countries. What are those people going to do in the society of a knowledge economy? It's something that you can ask yourself, is that sustainable when all the jobs are being outsourced to other parts of the world? Another one of our big engineering companies here in Montreal have been involved in scandals over supporting potentially illegitimate regimes around the world. And for sure, in many communities, economic growth overrides all other stakeholder concerns, whether it's about the community, whether it's about the environment. The one thing that government is focused on is economic growth. We can also look at, again, I've lost control of the cursor. We can look at certain statistics around communities and societies around the globe, and even on a cultural basis in terms of our languages, our style of dress, some of our cultural institutions, even the very family unit in which many of us were brought up are disappearing. In my home country of the UK, churches are closing and being converted into condominiums. The post office is being cut back, which became very much the social center of many of the community in the smaller villages. And even pubs, those institutions for going out drinking of an evening, are closing at very, very high rates. If those institutions close, and then you combine that with the breakdown of the family unit, where is the community? What is society looking like, particularly for the next generation of people who are starting to look increasingly elsewhere on the internet to find the community they're not finding in their current geographic location or within their families? And of course, there's lots of statistics around the biosphere, the environment, etc. Without going into too much detail, there's lots of statistics, and these are some put out by Peter Senge in 2008, that talks about basically we're using the Earth in a non-sustainable way. And the quote by Jason Clay, the VP of World Wildlife Fund, basically sums it up when he says, we use about 1¼ Earths today, and soon it will be more. We only have one Earth, and if we're using it already at 1¼ and increasingly using it, putting greater and greater demands on it, are we depleting the resources, and are we permanently damaging it? Is it being managed in a sustainable way? And again, it's easy to say, yes, I care about it, but are we willing to pay prices in order to take those big decisions that will have impacts economically, socially, etc., to make sure that biosphere is protected? And then finally, let's have a look at ourselves, each of us as individuals. Many of us are working 60 hours a week, 24/7. About 50% of North Americans do not take their annual allotted vacation. There's the rising real estate prices, which is probably putting the purchase of a house out of reach of many of the next generation. Increasing personal debt levels, whether that be credit cards, mortgages, etc., etc. We have global families, people relocating around the world. We have lots of broken families. If you get married, potentially around 50% of marriages now end up in divorce. The cost of education here in Quebec, we're having a big discussion, and for 3 months now many of the universities have been on strike, or the university students have been on strike protesting about the cost of education. The supersize me habits of eating fast food and overeating and the size of portions, the sedentary lifestyles many of us are leading, sitting at computers as opposed to working out in the fields or exercising, that lack of community I've already mentioned, which has meant that many younger people are going and looking on the internet in communities such as Second Life to find that sense of community that they're not finding in their everyday life. And of course there's the insatiable desire for the latest whatever, the latest gadget. It has to be the newest, the most expensive, the newest version, which of course economically our governments are pushing us to go ahead and buy, irrespective of the effect on our debt levels, because the economy needs it. Yet, with all this, surveys reveal that there's been no increase in levels of happiness at all over the last 50 years. So Is this a winning formula? When you look at it through the lens of sustainability, for corporations, in actual fact, they're losing. They're not lasting as long as they used to, and they're not generating economic growth as they should be. Our communities and societies, they're losing. Many of our communities are in a state of disarray. There's a lack of community, and what our society represents is increasingly questioned. The environment is losing, and as individuals, in the world of, through the lens of sustainability, many of us are losing as well. And you can ask yourself the question at this time, if all these four institutions are losing, why does the current paradigm of the way we're living our lives in an unsustainable manner continue? And in a sense, it's quite interesting that sustainability does boil down to the idea of, yes, I care, but I don't care enough to change the way the corporation is being managed, the way my reward system is structured in my organization, to step out into the community and try and change things. Work for the environment seems like a thankless task. And even as individuals, I still need my big house, my latest car, etc., in order to be deemed as to be a success. So sustainability might be a desired theoretical state, but in actual fact, when again those tough decisions need to be made, who is going to be there, who cares enough to actually go ahead and take those decisions? How did we get here? It's pretty simple, really. None of our various institutions, whether it's governments, individuals, organizations, etc., have put what I call 360 organizational sustainability as their number one priority. For national governments, economic growth still tends to be the biggest key performance indicators of how a nation is doing, irrespective of how its resources, its forests, its water resources, its fish stocks, or even its populations are struggling with health, personal debt, etc. The focus is economic growth, and we're seeing this now, particularly in these semi-recessional times. In organizations, perhaps understandably with the current system, again, if a company does not hit its quarterly earnings, what happens? It only has to be off target by 1 cent, and potentially the stock price can drop 15%, 20%. The CEO can lose their job quite easily. So it's understandable that the focus remains on short-term performance. And in a world where every company says our employees are our most important asset, I always think it's interesting to look at the status of the VP HR, if such a position even exists, within the hierarchy. It's often VP Finance, VP Manufacturing, VP Sales and Marketing, who are in much more powerful positions than the VP of Human Resources, who are often even excluded from strategic or executive decision-making. Moving on, individuals, we still want our clothes, the latest jewelry, a bigger, better job, more responsibility, a newer automobile, new house, etc., etc. That's been our focus, and not necessarily building a sustainable life in a sustainable community, in a sustainable environment. And I always find it's interesting when you look at the various business magazines that exist, all the profiles of leaders that they tend to talk about and focus on are those higher performance type A type CEOs who sleep 4 hours a night and work 70 to 80 hours a week. And they're put there as examples for how each of us should live our lives inside our organizations. The priority has not been on well-being, work-life balance, relationships, etc., etc. So, and in our communities, and we're seeing this again in our local communities here, mayors, local councils, etc., they're not necessarily rewarded for their support of cultural institutions or the have-nots of society. It's much more focused on have they attracted the latest shopping centre to be installed in their area with huge parking areas full of tarmac that bring in superficial low-income jobs, as opposed to looking at really what's what sort of vision of a community they want to have in 5 years, 10 years time, and setting out some sort of roadmap as to how such a community can be built. The arts, community groups, cultural heritage institutions tend to be very secondary in terms of the priorities in terms of the organization. So, 360 organizational sustainability is, which I mentioned earlier, is really a way of looking at and this diagram can be changed around. We can even put our employees or ourselves in the center of this circle. It just shows that each of us at some time, we work, we're employees. We also go home, where we're members of families, we're members of communities, whether it's the village, whether it's online communities, or whether it's the organization or at home, our waste policies, do we recycle, etc., etc. Do we buy products that are packaged in plastic, or do we take our recycled shopping bags to the supermarket every day, will impact on the biosphere. Do we let the water run when we're brushing our teeth, etc., etc.? This is kind of an integral model of looking at if an organization wants to be thinking of sustainability, it needs to look at the wellness, the well-being of employees at work, their well-being outside of work, the communities in which they live and work and function, and how sustainable are they, and of course the environment, the biosphere, a little bit along the lines of the triple bottom line that many people are talking about. So let's have a look at a few examples of companies who obviously do care. And it's kind of rewarding, refreshing to see that there are some organizations who do take the time and effort and the tough decisions to actually go ahead and make some decisions around sustainability. Obviously, in a knowledge-based economy, the challenge we face is to get a group of people, such as I've shown in this slide, often around a computer or around PowerPoint and Excel spreadsheets, and try and come up with some new ideas. And so, how do we get people in a frame of mind at work so that they are being creative, as opposed to something like the flash up on the screen there, where if our employees are not in a state of well-being at work, and that can be the physical environment, that can be the amount of time off they've had, whether they took their vacations or not. We want to avoid this in order to create an organization where we are developing new ideas and something that is going to prove to be sustainable. And Deming summed it up many years ago, and some of you may agree, some of you may not. It'll be interesting to hear in the chats on your questions. Our prevailing system of management has destroyed our people. And many people look at the challenge of having a sustainable career in particularly a large multinational organization as completely incompatible with having a sustainable relationship, being sustainable in one place around the world. It simply is, for many people, it is a choice. If I want to be successful at work, I'm probably not going to be successful in my relationships, in my family, in my community, etc. Some companies, as I mentioned, have received rewards for their efforts at creating a sense of well-being in their organization. But I wanted to focus on SAS, which is an interesting example. The statistics here are quite old, but to be honest, it wasn't worth putting them up to date because the company's still flourishing very well. And what I really want to show is what the efforts they've put into place in order to create a culture at work where they have basketball courts and swimming pools. The children can be taken to Montessori daycare centers. You can get your dry cleaning. You can have a haircut. You can have a massage. Flexible starting times. No fixed meeting schedules. And we all know how meetings, and particularly regular fixed meetings, eat into our work schedule. A 35-hour week is encouraged, and particularly this part of the culture here, where in a software business such as SAS, the assumption is that after 8 hours you're probably just adding bugs, so you're better off going home. And for me, when you look at creating a culture of an organization, you can see that this is very much focused on, this is not an easy place to work, but it's very much focused on when people come, we can put our other worries aside, we can take care of ourselves, and make sure that we as employees are sustainable. Unfortunately, many organizations use their employees as disposable assets. If you happen to burn out, what happens is you take your leave of absence or you actually leave the company, but there will be somebody else quite willing to take your place. SAS takes a very different approach. And what's more, they get a return on investment on it. And so do many of the other companies, the FedExes, the Citibanks, who have put wellness programs into place. So it's an interesting question to ask again. Well, if wellness actually gives you a return on investment, why is it that all companies don't offer wellness programs and really take care of their employees? And again, unfortunately, the answer is that focus on short-term returns. Do they really care whether you are still around in 5 years' time, 10 years' time? If you are willing to work 80 hours a week and the company is benefiting from it on the short term and the shareholders are benefit, why should we worry? Because somebody else, if you get ill, if your relationships break down, that is your problem. It's not the organization's, because there will always be someone there to take your place. And we can also go back to the idea of the power that HR has in any organization, because wellness programs often come from HR departments, and when they are competing for time and money with manufacturing, finance, etc., unfortunately, they often don't even get on senior management's radar screen. Let's have a look at a company that's really taking care of the biosphere, the environment, and Malthouse Foods is a great example of an organization. You may recognize their 100% carrot juice product, and they've now expanded into other lines. But it was interesting that Malthouse Foods, with their strategy, managed to double the consumption of a commodity product, that is carrots, in North America over a 10-year period. And it's interesting to see that in terms of sustainability, they've taken it to, I'd say, the limit in terms of looking at every piece of any given carrot and said, how can we fully exploit it and make sure every part of that carrot is used? So some is fed to cattle, some goes to juice. It's all those baby carrots we buy, which are actually manufactured, they're not really baby carrots, are ready to ship in less than 24 hours. And some obviously goes to their juice products. But it's amazing to think how technology and a focus on making sure that the use of those carrots is actually sustainable in the business model has enabled Malthouse Foods to be a very high growth company, which interestingly enough, when I met with them, they were run by venture capitalists. So it shows that venture capitalists can look at a company in a sustainable lens. And when you look at their vision statement, I think this bottom part illustrates exactly what they're trying to do. Healthy foods and beverage from the field to you with net zero footprint and sustainable benefits to all stakeholders. If you go into business with that sort of mindset, with that sort of values, it makes taking the tough decisions, i.e. do we focus on money, much more easier to make, because if we're focusing on sustainable benefits to all stakeholders, our employees, our community, our environment, the cities, etc., including our shareholders, then we're much likely to take decisions for the long run and in a sustainable manner. Other companies, again, many of them, and I've really only put these up to illustrate one point, because it's very tempting to think that it's almost impossible to work with some of the big companies in order to encourage them to look at their business models, their practices in a sustainable way. So if we can start on small companies, it's very gratifying, but the reality is if we can get the GEs, the DuPonts of this world to start managing their business in a sustainable way, there is a huge multiplier effect as they work with people around the globe, with their suppliers, etc. They can put a lot of pressure on other companies to start running their organizations in sustainable ways as well. Let's have a look at an example of government, and Bhutan is an interesting example to look at. Some of you may know Bhutan. It's actually got some bad press, Bhutan, and that's as a result of managing around sustainability, which I find kind of interesting. Bhutan is located near Nepal, between India and China, and it's a country of only 1 million inhabitants. It basically was ruled by a dictator, the king, who thankfully was a benevolent dictator, but nevertheless he was a dictator, which meant that he has the power to implement anything he decides. And he took a decision to look at the sustainability of Bhutan in a very holistic way. And he came up with the 5 pillars of GNH, which is gross national happiness. And again, for those of you interested, you can Google gross national happiness. Interesting term, which often raises a laugh, but compared with gross national product or domestic product, it's a completely different way of running a country in a sustainable way. Obviously, gross national product focuses on this one pillar, the economics of a country or a region. And the king of Bhutan said, well, economics is important. We need to make sure we have enough revenue coming into the country and that people have enough a roof over their head and food on the table. But our culture is very important as well. The education of our young is very important. Our environment, our biosphere is crucial. And also good governance is a key pillar of sustainability for any country as we move forward. Some of the things that the king put into place were some very strict economic development filters as to what could be done and couldn't be done in terms of exploiting the natural resources within the country. They did go ahead and develop a lot of hydroelectric systems, which the electricity was exported to India, which requires a lot of electricity. But one of the interesting key performance indicators for the country, and when I visited Bhutan, one of the things I think everybody knew was this statistic that 62% of the country should always be covered in forest. If we are going to maintain our forests in a sustainable way, environment, make sure erosion doesn't happen, etc., etc., every tree that is cut down needs to be replaced by another tree, if not more than one. They also looked at the tourist industry, and compared with Nepal, which has been very keen on encouraging people to go to Kathmandu and basically hang out in Kathmandu and Nepal for a long time, which has obviously brought revenue into the country but has impacted on the culture of Nepal. The king of Bhutan said, well, no, we don't actually want too many tourists because they will impact on the culture of the country. But if they do come, we want to make sure we get a fair cut of any revenues coming. So if you go for a 10-day vacation, that is, if you can get a visa, you have to pay $200 a night in advance to make sure that the country is gaining economically. And a few years ago, the limit of tourists was around 15,000 a year, which is not very much for an interesting country to go, for people to go and see. So we're paying an economic price while maintaining the culture of the country. Some of the other measures put in place were free universal education, which the students in Quebec would be keen to see, numerous cultural festivals each year, very strict building codes that have to conform to the historic culture of architecture in the country, obligatory wearing of national dress, particularly for government officials and for large organizations. There were basically dress police who would give you a quick education course if you were in jeans and t-shirt as opposed to the obligatory national dress. No fishing of rivers and lakes according to the Buddhist tradition. And the immigrants adopted Bhutanese culture. It was quite opposite to the kind of North American homogeny, the melting pot, etc., cultural diversity. There, the philosophy was our culture is important, and if you want to come here, you're welcome, but you have to adopt our culture. And this one, of course, is very interesting. A benevolent dictator decided that having a monarchy was not the best way and most sustainable way of government. So and this is interesting when you put this in context of Syria, etc. at the moment, Egypt, that here was one dictator who actually voluntarily handed over power and put all the parliamentary practices into place, including an education program, in order to show people how to vote, etc., etc. And again, while I was there, it was very interesting that most people wished that the king would remain as opposed to move into the democratic system. And democracy will come with challenges, because the king basically turned around and said, well, I'm no longer the single unique voice in terms of what goes on here. So now it will be up to each citizen to decide whether we build our buildings according to the architectural codes, whether we wear national dress to go to work, or whether we adopt Western ways of dressing. So just to show you a little bit, this next slide illustrates these two people are friends of mine wearing the traditional Bhutanese dress. This person here, you can see them, this is the national sport, which is archery, which literally they will spend all day on having archery tournaments. And just to illustrate the Bhutanese architectural style, you can see this building here, and here you will see some gas pumps. And this is a gas station, which obviously has followed the Bhutanese architectural codes in terms of what it should look like. Is this sustainable? It's interesting when you see the 5 pillars, particularly linked with the good governance, universal education, the culture, etc., all important. Have they paid an economic price? Yes, they have. They've certainly paid an economic price. And I couldn't say that I didn't see poor people when I was in Bhutan, but there was certainly a feeling of very strong cultural identity, a very strong belief in protecting their environment. Education, it was an interesting system in terms of that, at least in theory, you could go through the education system up to the doctorate level, providing you didn't fail. The moment you failed, you started to have to pay. So I literally met people who had their doctorates, who'd never paid a penny for education, and were now contributing back in Bhutan along the lines of gross national happiness, the 5 different pillars. We can ask ourselves here whether this is a model we could apply in Canada or anywhere else around the world. And I think the interesting viewpoint is that gross national happiness would certainly merit some discussion about what would it look like in different parts of the world. I don't think you can take the cookie-cutter approach and say just because it works in Bhutan it would work here. But again, an interesting example here in Quebec is that obviously Quebec society, which is a French-speaking society, has paid an economic price which all the individuals who live here have accepted that it's a price worth paying in order to protect our language and our French history and culture. We haven't done probably as well in terms of the environment and good governance, etc., etc. But it would be very interesting to have a debate here, as well as in your own geographic locations, as to what would gross national happiness look like in our particular part of the world, and how would we go about implementing such a model. Last but not least, let's take a look at ourselves, each as individuals, because we all are parts of different communities, we all work in organizations, but often we end up coming back and having to take some tough decisions, again, based on our values and the price we're going to have to pay to look at living a sustainable life. Let's have a quick look at how society measures success. This tends to be the same around the world. I've done workshops literally around the globe in different cultures. And income is very much a measure of people's success. The house they live in, the size of the house, the location of the house, whether they're married, whether they have children, which school the children go to, what sort of clothes they wear, what sort of education they've actually had themselves, what car they drive. The number of hours worked is an interesting one, because in many societies people will exaggerate the number of hours they work because it is seen as actually being a sign of success that you are so required that I have to work 60 hours a week. How do you measure your own success? And this is linked really with the next slide, I think, which is something Charles Handy worked on many years ago, and it's called the Doctrine of Enough. And basically he says, at any point in time, more of something gives you a diminishing level of satisfaction or well-being or value. For example, if I own a 2005 Hyundai Elantra, do I need to go out and buy a 2012 Hyundai Elantra? Or is it enough? If I have a plasma screen, do I need to go out and buy the latest plasma screen? Does it have to be 36-inch, 46-inch, 56-inch, etc.? Do I need to go out and get the next one? When is enough enough? When do I say no to my next promotion? When do I say no to relationships? And when do I say no in terms of behaviors? And coming back to the definition of success, sustainability is often around us saying, I don't need any more. I have enough. After all, most people listening into this webcast are probably in the top 5% of the wealthiest people in their societies. There are lots of people around the world who, when you travel, you realize have very little in terms of possessions, money, house, car, yet in terms of personal happiness, they're probably as happy, if not more happy than us. So a lot of it is looking at our values and deciding what is important to us. What do you have enough of? Because the moment you can say I have enough, the pressure to go and get more and put pressure on resources, to work more, etc., starts to evaporate. So saying no is often not the problem. In fact, it's often the solution. And you cannot give a strong yes to something if you're unable to say no. And coming round to saying no, I don't need new products, I don't need a new promotion, I don't need to earn more money, I don't need a bigger house, etc., is a big thing in terms of coming down to a strict definition of sustainability and a different way of living your life. The formula in North America that is perpetuated is that success at work will lead to wealth and it will lead to possessions, and in society's viewpoint you will be viewed as a success, which is supposed to be defined as we'll be happy, we will have financial security, we'll have better health, and we'll have lots of friends and a very strong family. That's kind of the advert for the Western dream for many of us, and it's what many people buy into. Unfortunately, that formula tends to resemble a little bit more formula number 2, where success at work, where we work 60, 80 hours a week, we're on call 24 hours a day, will no doubt give us more possessions. But is that success? And that's something each of us has to ask ourselves. Many of us are more dissatisfied with our life. We are not happier. Many of us, although we have more possessions, we're very high in terms of credit card debt, mortgage debt, etc. in order to support those possessions. Our relative ill health, not in terms of diseases, but just in terms of that sedentary lifestyle, poor eating practices, lack of exercise, working at the computer all the time. And although it would be great to spend time with friends, what we often do is spend time with acquaintances through websites such as Facebook or LinkedIn or Skype even. And as opposed to having strong families in this global world and of broken marriages, etc., many of us have broken families. This is, although hopefully not all of us suffer from all of these symptoms, many of us suffer from one or two. And often it's because we've been striving for formula number 1, and unfortunately the reality is much more formula number 2. So the way I'm encouraging people to look at it is really to define what is success. Success in our personal lives, success in terms of the community in which we live in, success in terms of the organization we want to contribute to, success in terms of the level of pollution, contamination we put into the environment. Because if we can define a life for ourselves that we define as being successful, spending 8 hours a day at work, it will automatically mean we will be successful at work on a sustainable level. And for many of us, given the current fiscal situation of our governments, we have to look at it as a sustainable way, because retirement at 55, which everybody again was aiming for, is now more likely to be 70 or 75. We need to find a sustainable way of working in order to be successful ourselves, build a successful organization, and hopefully build communities around some sort of model of gross national happiness which will prove to be sustainable over the long run and desirable for the people who are living there. So that's a quick overview of 360 organizational sustainability. It's all around our values, and it's all around a matter of asking ourselves, yes, I might care, but how much do I care? And what's my counter commitment, if I like? What else do I care about that is stopping me from really stepping forward into action around sustainability? A few questions we can ask ourselves in closing, particularly on an executive team in organizations. Are we achieving growth and creating economic value? Many companies, many organizations are not. Are we developing and leading our human resources in a sustainable manner, or are we leading them to burnout? Is it wellness? Is the wellness or work-life balance formula in our organization sustainable for all our employees? Are the lifestyles and ambitions of our employees outside of the organization attainable and sustainable? That's when our organizations impact on our communities. Are the local, national, or global communities of which we are part desirable and sustainable? And finally, are we at least environmentally neutral in all our and our suppliers and distributors, etc. operation? So, I think if Richard's still there, this would be the time when hopefully we've got some questions and we can have a little bit of a conversation around, so really, do you care?
Thank you, Mark. Removing my moderator's hat and putting on my attendee hat, I just want to say that this was fascinating and very, very inspirational. I invite everybody to submit questions through the box of our platform today. You can find the question box by looking at the top right-hand corner of your screen, and you'll see a little red arrow. If you click that, you'll see the question box down below. Mark, in relation to sustainability with companies, you gave us some case studies of various organizations that are doing good things. Is it less likely that a public company might adopt sustainable practices by virtue of the fact that they have pressure from shareholders or external shareholders?
Well, actually, it's with the advent of social media and Twitter, it's getting very interesting now that just one stakeholder, and this can be an individual, can now put an enormous amount of pressure on even the biggest public companies. And that's something that really companies have not really got a handle on. They've always been very careful in managing relationships with various advocacy groups or lobby groups for the environment or for indigenous cultures, if you can think of the mining companies, etc., around the world we've heard of, or in the north of Canada where we're doing hydroelectric projects, etc. But now, and I had a client recently who there was 2 or 3 people very active in social media who were able to hold really the board of directors very accountable just by being so dedicated to making sure that this company changed its practices. So we're starting to actually get a balancing out of the pressure to perform on the short term in terms of achieving the numbers. And obviously we do need to achieve the numbers. But I think the challenge is going to be for CEOs to start saying, managing expectations a little bit in terms of the returns going to shareholders and looking at the risk factor, because environmental risk, community risk, strikes, whatever it happens to be, are upsetting, as I say, even 1 or 2 advocacy groups or individuals can cause, just in terms of the level of risk, this very important high levels of economic damage to the company in the future. So balancing this, due to the advent of social media, is becoming a much more greater challenge and an opportunity for all of us to contribute much more in that battle for sustainability.
Excellent, thank you. We have a question from Alex. Alex is asking, what you are proposing is that people step away from the predominant social paradigm and give up their benefits and privileges. People who hold privilege are frequently reluctant to give it up, though. What do you see as the single primary contributor that will lead to this paradigm shift?
It's a tough one because I think there's a lot of truth in what Alex says. And most organizations only change when there's a crisis. And the reality is, even with my strategic planning business, I'd like to say that companies call me in when things are going well and they want to plan out for the next 3 to 5 years, but often they call me in when things are going badly. And a lot of the work I do with individuals as well comes when they have a wake-up of some type. And sometimes it could be the economic crash, which we've all experienced recently looking at our retirement funds, etc., has made people question a little bit, is their current model sustainable? Is retirement attainable or even desirable? And often what happens is people may burn out, they may end up getting divorced, or it might be, as I say, an economic wake-up that all of a sudden they have a paradigm shift in realizing that what they've been focused on in the past is not going to serve them in the future. And if that doesn't happen, unfortunately, a lot of the leadership is going to go on, because I think once you do have those privileges, it's tough to give them up. But there's an expression that's used on TV sometimes, you know, how's it working for you? And for many people, there is kind of at the executive level, on an individual level, you can have very stimulating and I'd like to say hopeful conversations on an individual level with executives realizing that things have to change. But it is systemic. Until the quarterly earnings focus and some of the other expectations, and even the expectations of their employees, that, you know, the CEO knows exactly what's going to happen and that the rewards are going to be there for them on an individual level. Until the system changes a little bit, it's tough for individuals to implement change on their own.
One of the things I think we're seeing today is governments seem to believe that the way to achieve balanced budgets is often through austerity, and consequently they're going to be shifting more and more the costs of everything onto the citizens. So what would you say to citizens who feel a greater pressure, a greater financial pressure, just to be able to keep their heads above water when basic services end up costing them more and more as organizations decide to solve their fiscal problems by cutting social programs?
Well, unfortunately, that's the reality that we're living in this world. I mean, the economic weight and power of government has been diminishing for probably 10, even 20 years now. The government used to be the leader in a lot of change, and the reality is the budgets are not there anymore, and a lot of it is coming down to the individual to make choices, and some of that is being seen in terms of forming different communities of self-help, of bartering, of trying to empower citizenry, again, through social media, by organizing communities of like-minded people. It's kind of, yes, the model is changing. Unfortunately, again, you can speak for Canada and Quebec here, there's no clear vision of what the future role of government is going to be once that economic drive is recognized for taking us down a path that a lot of people no longer value, no longer seeking. So self-organization of small groups, and coupled with the power of social media, is going to start enabling communities, individuals, to start taking some of those decisions, at least in the kind of municipal levels, etc. And I think the recognition is there that what was good for the boomers, if you like, that generation, that world has gone. That is not going to be there for the future. So we're going through kind of a large shift now in and I'm not sure what that world is going to look like 5, 10 years out as a new kind of world emerges.
Interesting. You know, in terms of individual sustainability and happiness, happiness research is really not very old. Positive psychology, the area of positive psychology really only came into being in 1998. And before that, I think a lot of people believed that the way to achieve sustainable happiness in your lives was really by obtaining objects and status and that type of thing. You get a sense that people are increasingly aware that what provides value in their lives may not be the belongings, but it's the relationships with others, the meaningful work, and so on?
I'd like to say yes, but I don't think we're there yet.
Okay.
The predominant model still is that, you know, more of everything is good for me. And again, economically, if everybody was driving, and I use the example of the 2005 Hyundai Elantra that I happened to drive, if everybody was driving that and nobody was buying new cars, think of the economic consequences. I mean, Canada's economy, particularly Ontario's economy, would be in crisis. And if we weren't buying TVs, and the entire model is built on consuming. And
yeah.
And until that it's recognized that that model, it's kind of self-perpetuating, and we're digging ourselves into a bigger and bigger hole. And unfortunately, it is up to each individual to kind of sit back, reflect what is important to them, and what price are they willing to pay in order to have a sustainable lifestyle, and one where they are getting, you know, their cultural, their social, and their intellectual needs satisfied at the same time as their economic ones. I'm kind of hoping that at some date there will be an awakening that, you know, more products, more bigger houses, more latest cars will one day be recognized as this is not the way forward. But unfortunately, there's just a few people kind of crying into the wind at the moment with that sort of message.
I see. We only have about 2 minutes left, so probably time for just one more question. Many of us are taking a break in our work days right now to attend this. So just to get back to issues related to the workplace, if the evidence is so clear that organizations can have such a great impact on creating a sustainable workforce, why do all companies not have a wellness program?
Again, I think it's partly linked to HR, the lack of power of HR. People see any money spent on wellness programs as reaping results 2 years, 3 years, maybe more down the line. And the reality is many people, and many of us, look at ourselves as we're not even going to be here in 2 to 3 years' time. We're going to have moved on to something else. So why don't we put our efforts into something that's going to give us short-term returns? I think for me it really does come down to the individual having to look at their own lifestyle and saying what's important to them, and looking at mapping out their life, where they want to take it forward, and recognizing that you can't have everything. The model has been that you can have everything and you should try and have everything. But I guess I recognize with my needs in terms of whether it's vacation or time or where I live, etc., that unfortunately I came to the conclusion I was unemployable in a sense in a large organization because I would never get the work-life balance that I seek, which meant that I ended up working on my own, which I do pay a price for that. There's no, the kind of projects I will get as doing strategy, I will not get the big, the blue chip companies coming to me to do strategy. That's the price I pay to have work-life balance. And I think every person's got to sit down and say, what do they want out of life and what price are they willing to pay in order to get there? And the recognition that the environment, our communities, our families are crucial elements of our well-being and sustainability, I think come to the fore when we do those sort of reflective activities.
Mark, thank you very, very, very much. This was an excellent presentation. This concludes today's event of McGill University School of Continuing Studies. I'd like to extend a special thank you to our speaker today, Mark Hollingworth. When leaving this presentation, we invite you to fill out the feedback survey, which appears in a pop-up window. Your comments and feedback will be greatly appreciated and will help us make future events as good as this one. We invite you to visit the McGill School of Continuing Studies website and check our listing of upcoming webinars and workshops. Once again, thank you very, very much to Mark Hollingworth and to all of you for having attended this session today.
Thank you.